The cold steel felt like a brand, not just on her skin but on her dignity. It was a sharp, biting cold that had nothing to do with the airport's aggressive air conditioning and everything to do with the raw humiliation of the moment. The click of the handcuffs locking into place was a sound that echoed with a grim finality, a metallic punctuation mark on an act of profound injustice. Here, in the sprawling, cathedral-like expanse of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport's Terminal D, one of the busiest, most chaotic crossroads on the planet, Dr. Anya Sharma stood shackled. Her back was ramrod straight, a lifetime of discipline refusing to let her slump. Even now, she faced the towering wall of glass that looked out onto the tarmac, where jets rested and refueled like great, slumbering beasts. The brilliant, sterile white lights of the terminal reflected off the glass, creating a dizzying, almost surreal glare. But they couldn't penetrate the ugly shadow that had just fallen over her. Her suit, a masterfully tailored piece of dark gray wool, felt less like a symbol of her station and more like a costume in a play she never auditioned for. Her leather handbag, a discreet but undeniably expensive designer piece, lay unceremoniously at her feet, looking as out of place as she felt. All her quiet power, all her hard-won elegance, seemed to evaporate under the rough, presumptuous hands of the two police officers standing before her. Officer Mike Rico Rodriguez, clearly the one in charge, stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He was a man in his late 20s, with a swagger that felt more practiced than earned. His thin lips were curled into a sneer, a toxic cocktail of mockery and contempt that he didn't bother to hide. His dark hair was buzzed short, military style, but his eyes were anything but disciplined. They were cold, blue, and restless, scanning Dr. Sharma from her sensible heels to her composed face, lingering with deliberate insolence on her expensive clothes and luggage. He was performing a crude calculation in his head, and the sum was adding up to opportunity. Beside him, Officer Kevin Miller, younger, greener, and radiating a nervous energy, tried to project an image of toughness. But it was a flimsy facade. His eyes, wide and uncertain, darted between his partner and the woman in cuffs, a silent testament to his insecurity. He was a follower, a backup singer in Rodriguez's crooked tune, and right now, his only role was to stand by and provide the illusion of legitimate procedure. Well, look what we have here, Rodriguez said, his voice a low drawl laced with cheap confidence. He pitched it just loud enough to be heard over the terminal's ambient noise, causing a few passing travelers to cast curious glances their way before quickly looking down and hurrying off. No one wanted to get involved. These fancy clothes, that crocodile handbag. You must be doing real well for yourself, ma'am. He spat the word ma'am like it was an insult, a sarcastic jab at her composure. I know your type, looking a little too successful, a little too out of place. You smuggling something in that bag? Or is the bag itself the contraband? He gestured toward the handbag at her feet as if it contained a ticking bomb. Miller, ever the echo, quickly chimed in, though his voice wavered slightly.
Yeah, Rico.
Real suspicious. Why would someone, like her, have all this expensive stuff? But Dr. Anya Sharma remained perfectly, unervingly silent. There was no fear in her eyes, no flicker of panic. Instead, her dark, piercing gaze swept calmly over her surroundings, not as a victim, but with the intense, all-consuming focus of a seasoned investigator. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument honed by decades of navigating the most complex and dangerous situations imaginable, was working at full capacity. She was absorbing everything. Rodriguez's flushed face, the smug tilt of his chin, the number 1138 glinting on his name tag. Miller's fidgeting hands, the way he couldn't keep his eyes still, his own badge number, 1205. Their precise positions in the vast terminal. The exact orientation of the half-dozen security cameras mounted on the ceiling, their unblinking lenses silently documenting this whole sordid affair. She noted the reactions of the other passengers, the initial curiosity, the flicker of concern, then the hasty retreat into a sad, complicit silence. It was a silence she knew all too well, The air around them was thick with the unique symphony of a major airport. The disembodied, echoing announcements of arrivals and departures, the ceaseless clatter of suitcase wheels on the polished terrazzo floor, and the faint, pervasive smell of jet fuel that clung to everything. The stark contrast between the elegant, mysteriously calm woman in handcuffs and the crass, aggressive posture of the two young officers was a painful, jarring spectacle. Her silence seemed to unnerve Rodriguez. It wasn't the reaction he expected. He wanted tears, pleading, fear. He got stone-cold composure. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping into a falsely conspiratorial tone. The stale scent of cigarette smoke wafted from his breath. "Listen, ma'am," he said, the word now laced with a naked threat. "We can do this the hard way. We can haul you down to the airport substation, tear apart every single thing you're carrying, run a full background check. You know, the paperwork around here is a nightmare. You could be stuck here for days. Miss your meetings, your flights, all that important business." He paused, staring into her unwavering eyes, searching for a crack in her armor. He didn't find one. "Or," Rodriguez continued, his tone shifting into the unmistakable cadence of a shakedown, "you could make things a lot easier, a lot more pleasant, for everyone involved." Dr. Sharma's eyes grew colder, if that was even possible. She knew exactly where this was going. Just a little, goodwill. He licked his dry lips, his greedy nature now on full display. "A little compensation for our time. Consider it a do not disturb fee." He glanced around furtively, though his arrogance still kept his voice from being a true whisper. "How about $1,000? Cash? Not a lot for someone as posh as you, right?" He gestured towards her purse. "You give us the money, and we pretend this whole thing never happened. All our suspicions? Gone. These cuffs." He jingled a key. "They come right off. You can walk right out that door and go wherever you were going. No one knows. No one will ever know. Quick and easy, right?" His face was a mask of smug certainty. He was sure he had her. A wealthy, solitary black woman, far from home, would be terrified of the system, of the hassle, of the danger. She would pay. Of course, she would pay. Beside him, Kevin Miller's tense face now held a flicker of greedy anticipation. $1,000 split two ways was a hell of a bonus for a few minutes of ugly work. Racism, abuse of power, false arrest, and now the brazen cherry on top, attempted extortion. Right here, under the watchful eyes of 100 cameras, in the heart of a federal facility. These two young men, blinded by their prejudice and their greed, had no idea. They thought they were digging for gold. In reality, they had just dug their own graves. They thought they had cornered an easy target. They had no idea they weren't just crossing a line. They were ending their careers, their freedom, their entire futures, because they had just tried to extort the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is the story of how one phone call brought the full weight of justice crashing down. But to understand how we got here, to truly grasp the monumental scale of the mistake these two officers were making, we have to go back just 30 minutes. Before the cold steel, before the whispered threats, before the world turned upside down. The scene begins not with confrontation, but with the quiet, orderly rhythm of travel. Dr. Anya Sharma, looking every bit the part of a high-powered executive, stepped off a British Airways flight from London Heathrow. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of purpose and confidence. She was 48 years old, though the demanding nature of her job had etched fine lines of wisdom and weariness around her sharp, intelligent eyes. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant, no-nonsense chignon, and her gaze, even when relaxed, seemed to take in everything. This wasn't just a business trip. It was a mission. As the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a position she had earned through decades of tireless work, rising from a field agent in the gritty streets of Chicago to the highest seat of federal law enforcement, Dr. Sharma was conducting a personal, under-the-radar assessment. After a major international conference in London on global cybersecurity and counterterrorism, she had made a deliberate choice. Instead of the usual fanfare of a government jet and a waiting motorcade, she would fly commercial. She wanted to see the system the way every other citizen did. She wanted to test the security protocols at a major U.S. hub like DFW without the forewarning that her official presence would bring. It was a test. She just didn't know she was about to become the subject of a very different, much more dangerous one. She was dressed for anonymity, or at least the corporate version of it. The suit was a designer label, but it was a classic cut, dark and understated. Her handbag and matching rolling suitcase were of similar quality, expensive. Yes, but discreet, with no obvious logos screaming for attention. She wanted to blend into the sea of business travelers, to be just another face in the crowd. But perhaps that was her miscalculation. In a world viewed through a lens of prejudice, a black woman traveling alone, exuding an aura of success and authority, without a man or a loud entourage to validate it, didn't blend in. To certain eyes, she stood out like a flare in the night. She cleared immigration with the practiced ease of a seasoned traveler, collected her single suitcase from the baggage carousel, and began the long walk toward the taxi and rideshare stands. The terminal was a river of humanity, a chaotic ballet of hellos and goodbyes, of tired families and anxious business people. The air was thick with the Texas-sized hustle, the scent of jet fuel, and the faint, sweet smell of overpriced Cinnabon. She was just another drop in that river, moving steadily toward her destination. And that's when she caught their eye. Officers Rodriguez and Miller were stationed near the exit, ostensibly to provide a security presence. But they were bored. Rodriguez, especially, was scanning the crowd not for threats, but for targets of opportunity, someone to hassle, to exert his minor authority over, to break the monotony of the shift. And then he saw her. He saw the suit, the bag, the confident stride. He saw a black woman who looked like she had more money than he did. And in his warped worldview, that equation didn't compute. It was an anomaly that needed to be investigated. He nudged Miller. "Check her out," he muttered, just loud enough for his partner to hear.
10 o'clock.
Miller followed his gaze. "The lady in the suit? Yeah, something's off," Rodriguez decided, based on nothing more than his own biases. "Let's go have a chat." As Dr. Sharma neared the exit, they stepped forward, positioning themselves to block her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," Rodriguez began, his tone initially clipped and professional, a carefully rehearsed opening line. "We're conducting a random security screening. We'll need to see your identification." Dr. Sharma paused, her expression unreadable. She felt a familiar, weary tightening in her gut, but on the outside, she was a picture of calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice even and polite. "Random check," Rodriguez repeated curtly, his eyes already doing a deep dive on her attire. "ID, please." Without a word, Dr. Sharma reached into her handbag, her movements fluid and unhurried. She produced her standard Texas driver's license. It was a valid form of identification that, by design, revealed nothing about her true position. It was the ID of Anya Sharma, citizen. Rodriguez took the license, holding it a little too long, examining it with an unnecessary level of scrutiny as if he expected it to be a cheap forgery. Then the questions began, straying immediately from the script of a random screening. "Where are you coming from, ma'am?" "London," she replied simply. "What's a lady like you doing in London? Business or pleasure?" His tone was overly familiar, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Business," she said, offering no further details. His eyes flickered down to her luggage. "What's in the bags?" "Anything to declare. Personal belongings." "Nothing to declare." Then he leaned in a little, his voice dropping slightly. "This a real crocodile bag? Must have cost a fortune. What kind of work do you do to afford this stuff?" And there it was, the pivot. The moment the encounter shed any pretense of official police business and became what it truly was, an interrogation based on race and perceived class. Her mind, the ever-present investigator, flagged it instantly. Racial profiling, questioning beyond the scope of a routine stop, fishing for a pretext. She could have ended it right there. A few well-chosen words, a flash of a different ID, and these two would have been apologizing and backing away. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was to observe the system, and right now the system was showing her its ugliest side. She decided to let it play out. The use of the legal term probable cause was like a red flag to a bull for Rodriguez. He took it as a direct challenge to his authority, an affront from this woman who he had already decided was uppity. His professional veneer cracked and fell away, revealing the raw arrogance beneath. "Probable cause?" he sneered, his voice rising. "Honey, in this airport you lookin' this rich and being. You is probable cause." The unspoken word hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. "We suspect you may be trafficking illegal goods. We're gonna need to search your luggage. Right here, right now." Dr. Sharma stood her ground, looking him directly in the eye. "On what basis do you suspect that? Do you have a warrant? Or do you have a specific, articulable fact that would lead a reasonable officer to that conclusion?" His face flushed with anger. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. She was supposed to be intimidated, flustered. Instead, she was quoting the law back at him. He saw it as nothing but insolence. "That's it. That's enough," he snapped, his voice sharp and loud. "Your attitude is suspicious. Your whole story is suspicious." Carter, he had mistakenly used his partner's last name instead of his first, a slip caused by his rising anger. "Miller, handcuff her. We're taking her in for questioning." Kevin Miller froze for a second, his eyes wide with a flash of, "Are you sure about this?" Panic. This was escalating way too fast. But one look at the furious glare from his senior partner and his spine dissolved. He was a rookie. You back your partner, no matter what. That was the code. He fumbled for his handcuffs. "You have no legal right to do this," Dr. Sharma stated, her voice now sharp as glass. "This is an abuse of power. This is false imprisonment." "Shut up," Rodriguez shouted, his control completely gone. "You think you know the law better than me? Where'd a woman like you get this money anyway? Gotta be dirty. It's always dirty. Cuff her, Miller. Now." And so, following a direct, unlawful order, Kevin Miller stepped forward and the cold steel tightened around Dr. Anya Sharma's wrists. The first, irrevocable crime had been committed. But throughout the entire process, the stop, the racist questions, the baseless accusation, and finally the illegal arrest, Sharma showed no fear. She was not just a victim. She was an investigator. And she was quietly, calmly, gathering all the evidence she would ever need. The trap was set. All she had to do was wait for them to walk right into it. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut, the air in the terminal seemed to change. It was as if a bubble of warped reality had formed around the three of them. For the two officers, it was a point of no return. They had crossed a line, and the only way forward was to double down, to prove their initial, flawed judgment was right. For Dr. Sharma, it was the moment the exercise ceased to be an observation and became an active investigation. The Rubicon had been crossed. "Let's go," Rodriguez grunted, nudging her forward with a light but firm push to her shoulder. It was an unnecessary act of dominance, a physical assertion of the power he now wielded. They didn't move her toward the official airport police substation, which was brightly lit and populated. Instead, Rodriguez led the way down a less-traveled corridor, away from the main flow of passengers, toward a series of service hallways. The sounds of the bustling terminal began to fade, replaced by the low hum of ventilation systems and the sterile silence of institutional back rooms. The move was tactical and menacing. It was designed to isolate her, to heighten her sense of vulnerability, to take her off the main stage and into their private theater. Kevin Miller walked slightly behind, a nervous sentry. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his youthful face a canvas of conflicting emotions. There was the thrill of the action, the adrenaline of a real collar, but it was tainted by a growing, sickening unease. This felt wrong. The woman was too calm, too articulate. Her protestations about her rights weren't the frantic denials of a common criminal. They were precise, legalistic, and unervingly confident. But Rico was the senior man, the guy who knew the ropes. You trust your partner. You back his play. Miller swallowed his doubt and kept walking. They stopped in a gray, featureless service corridor. A fire extinguisher and a utility closet were the only landmarks. The lighting was dimmer here, the air stale. It was a liminal space, a place where rules felt more flexible. This was where Rodriguez chose to make his play. He leaned against the wall, assuming an air of casual authority. "All right, ma'am," he began, the sneer returning to his face. "Let's try this again. You were not being cooperative out there. Made a real scene. That's resisting. We can add that to the list." Dr. Sharma said nothing. Her silence was a weapon, and it was driving him crazy. She simply watched him, her dark eyes analytical, patient. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen in a petri dish. "Look, I'm trying to be a nice guy here," he lied, pushing off the wall and taking a step toward her. "I get it. You've got places to be, people to see. This whole situation is inconvenient for you and for us. I got reports to write, Miller's got a patrol to finish. Nobody wants to spend the next 8 hours in a windowless room filling out paperwork over a simple misunderstanding." He let the phrase simple misunderstanding hang in the air, an offer of a rewrite, a chance to reframe the narrative from felony arrest to something that could be smoothed over. Dr. Sharma's internal monologue was running at lightning speed. He's establishing a false premise of mutual inconvenience. He's creating a problem that he can then offer to solve. For a price. Classic extortion setup. Stage 1, the justification. She remained silent. Her stillness was her power. It forced him to keep talking, to fill the void, to reveal more and more of his intent. "So," he continued, stepping even closer, dropping his voice to that mock-friendly, conspiratorial tone she'd heard earlier. "We can make this all go away, right now."
No fas. No mus punto.
He glanced at Miller, a quick, commanding look, before turning his attention back to her. "But it's gonna require a little gesture of goodwill, a sign that you appreciate us being flexible." Stage 2. The insinuation her mind cataloged. He's moving from justification to the proposition itself. He's still using coded language, testing the waters. Her silence was absolute. It was a blank wall he was throwing his words against, and they were just falling to the floor. His frustration was visibly growing. The nice guy facade was crumbling again. "What, are you deaf?" he snapped. "I'm offering you a way out of this. A get-out-of-jail-free card." "I haven't done anything to warrant being in jail," she stated, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. It was the first thing she'd said in the corridor, and the words, simple and true, seemed to suck the air out of the space. Rodriguez actually recoiled for a second. Then his anger flared. "You've got a smart mouth, you know that? That's what's got you into this mess." He gestured at her expensive suit. "And this, you think you can just waltz in here, looking like you own the place and not answer questions? We're the police. We run this airport." He took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation, to get back to his script. He leaned in so close she could smell the coffee on his breath, mixed with the faint, sour odor of his dishonesty. This was it, the final act. "Listen, ma'am," he said, the words now stripped of any pretense. "Here's the deal. We can make this real easy or real hard. $1,000, cash, and we all walk away. No paperwork, no trouble. It's a simple transaction." Stage 3. The explicit offer. Felony extortion. He's done. Dr. Sharma's mind coolly concluded. She had it all. The unlawful stop, the false arrest, and now a direct, quantifiable demand for a bribe. He saw the flicker in her eyes, not of fear, but of something else he couldn't quite decipher, and mistook it for calculation, for her weighing the cost. He pressed his advantage. "Think about it," he coaxed, his voice like oil. $1,000. For you, that's probably what you paid for those shoes. For us, it's a token of your appreciation. You slide the money out of that fancy bag of yours, we take these cuffs off, and you're on your way to your 5-star hotel. We forget we ever saw you. Your record stays clean. It's a business decision. And you look like a smart businesswoman. He glanced at the handbag at her feet. Just give us the money, and this nightmare is over. Quick and easy, right? He stood back, his arms crossed again, that smug, confident smirk returning. He was sure he had closed the deal. He had laid out the terms, the threats, and the solution. He had cornered her, isolated her, and now he was offering her the key to her cage for a price he deemed more than fair. He looked over at his partner, Miller, who was now staring at Dr. Sharma with a desperate, expectant look on his face. The kid was already spending his $500 in his head. But Dr. Anya Sharma wasn't thinking about the money. She wasn't thinking about the hassle or the missed appointments. Fear was not an option. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. In her line of work, fear was a traitor that opened the door to mistakes, and mistakes got people killed. Instead, a cold, calculated calm had taken over her entire being. This was the precipice. The moment an investigation crystallizes. He was talking. Good. Let him talk. Let him dig his own grave with his own words. Every syllable he uttered was another nail in his own coffin. Her silence wasn't born of foolish defiance or terror. It was a strategy. She was giving him more time, more rope to hang himself. And he was eagerly, stupidly, taking every inch of it. The time for observation was over. The time for action was about to begin. The silence in the service corridor stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. It was no longer a passive quiet, but an active, suffocating presence. Rico Rodriguez's smug grin began to falter, twitching at the edges. He had made his offer, the final play in his grubby little game, and the response was nothing. Just the unwavering, analytical gaze of the woman in handcuffs. It was like staring into a deep, dark well and seeing no reflection. "What, no money?" he finally blurted out, his voice sharp with impatience and a dawning hint of confusion. "Or you just don't want to cooperate? Is that it? You think you're too good to take the deal?" He was losing the script, ad-libbing now out of frustration. He had expected pleading, negotiation, or the quiet, defeated rustle of a purse opening. This eerie, powerful silence was something he had no protocol for. "Fine," he snapped, throwing his hands up in a theatrical gesture of exasperation. "Have it your way. We're going to the station. You'll have plenty of time to talk there. You'll talk to us, you'll talk to the detectives, maybe you'll even talk to a federal prosecutor by the time we're done stacking charges on you. Resisting arrest, suspicion of trafficking, disorderly conduct." He was inventing crimes now, trying to intimidate her with a phantom mountain of legal trouble. He turned to Miller, signaling with a jerk of his head. "All right, let's go. Get her moving." He was probably planning to take her to some isolated holding room, not the official station, a place where he could continue the pressure away from any prying eyes. That was the last straw, the final move on the chessboard. Dr. Sharma knew the moment had arrived. She had collected irrefutable evidence of a whole chain of criminal misconduct. Racial profiling, abuse of power, false arrest, and it had all culminated in a brazen, recorded plot of extortion. She had let them build their own prison, brick by brick. Now it was time to lock the door. It was time for these two young men to face the real, devastating consequences of their actions. It was time for them to learn, in the most permanent way possible, just how fatally wrong they had been. Just as Kevin Miller's hand, hesitant but obedient, touched Dr. Sharma's arm to nudge her forward, she spoke. Her voice sliced through the stale air. It was surprisingly calm, almost conversational. Yet it possessed an undercurrent of pure, unadulterated authority that made both officers flinch as if they'd been struck. "I need to make a phone call," she said. Each word was clear, deliberate, and perfectly enunciated. Rico Rodriguez let out a short, mocking laugh, a last gasp of his rapidly deflating ego. "A phone call? Now? You finally decide to talk, and that's what you say. Who you gonna call? Your lawyer? Your boss to wire the ransom money?" The taunts were automatic, but they lacked the conviction of before. Something in her tone had put him on edge. Dr. Sharma ignored his words as if he were a buzzing fly. She simply repeated her request, her tone now leaving no room for refusal. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I need to call my deputy director. Deputy director? The two officers exchanged a confused glance. The term was corporate, official. It didn't fit their narrative of her being some kind of high-end criminal. Deputy director of what? Rodriguez asked, his voice still patronizing but now tinged with a flicker of genuine curiosity. What, you work for some big-shot company in Dallas? You think your vice president is going to get you out of this? He still thought this was about business, about a corporate power play. He was in a completely different universe of understanding. Give me my cell phone, please, Dr. Sharma demanded, her voice firm. It's in the zippered compartment of my handbag. Miller looked at Rodriguez, seeking direction. Rodriguez, perhaps thinking it couldn't hurt, maybe she really was calling someone to bring the money, gave a slight, dismissive shrug. Let her try. It might even speed things up. He nodded at Miller. The young officer bent down, his hands fumbling slightly as he opened the expensive leather bag. He found the phone, a nondescript black slab that looked like any other high-end smartphone. On the surface, it was unremarkable. In reality, it was a government-issued communications device, fortified with a level of encryption that would make a nation-state's intelligence agency weep with frustration. Miller handed the phone to Dr. Sharma. Even with her hands cuffed in front of her, she handled the device with practiced dexterity. Her thumb tapped the screen in a complex, rhythmic pattern, not a password, but a biometric and pressure-sensitive sequence known only to her. The screen lit up, and a call was placed almost instantly to a number designated as top priority, a number that bypassed all switchboards and went straight to its destination. Following her slight nod, a bewildered Kevin Miller held the phone to her ear. The line was answered on the very first ring. There was no hello, just a deep, professional male voice, alert and ready. Markham, it's Sharma, Dr. Sharma said into the phone, and in that instant, her voice transformed completely. It was no longer the voice of a calm but beleaguered passenger. It was the voice of a supreme commander giving orders on a battlefield. It was a voice that expected and received immediate and unquestioning obedience. I'm at DFW Terminal D, near Gate 22, she stated, her eyes locking onto the two officers who were now listening with growing bewilderment. She paused for a beat, letting them absorb the shift in her demeanor. We have a Code 1 security incident involving 2 Port Authority police officers here. Her gaze, cold as a winter storm, flickered from Rodriguez to Miller. Names: Officer Mike Rodriguez, Badge 1138, and Officer Kevin Miller, Badge 1205. They have placed me under unlawful arrest and have just committed felony extortion. Her voice dropped, becoming even colder, harder, more precise. I need the Dallas field office's rapid response team at my location, immediately. Notify Special Agent in Charge David Chin. Authorize Level 1 priority. Repeat, Level 1. Rodriguez and Miller heard every single word. Markham, Sharma, Dallas FBI Field Office. Special Agent in Charge David Chin. Level 1 priority. The names and terms were like a series of hammer blows, each one striking with more force than the last. But it was the 3 letters that made their blood run cold. FBI. Their faces, which had been slowly shifting from smugness to confusion, now collapsed into sheer, unadulterated shock. Who was this woman? Why was she calling the FBI? How did she know the name of the special agent in charge of the Dallas office? A name they only heard in high-level security briefings. And what in God's name did Level 1 priority mean? It sounded important. It sounded terrifying. A vague, creeping sense of dread began to snake its way up their spines. A primal fear that they had just stepped on a landmine, and the click was the sound of her phone call ending. Understood, Markham, she said curtly. Stand by for further instructions. She nodded for Miller to take the phone away. Then, she turned her full, undivided attention back to Rico Rodriguez. His sneer was long gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of growing horror. His face had gone from flushed red to a pasty, sickly white. "Gentlemen," Dr. Sharma said. Her voice as cold and sharp as ice. Each word a precise cut into the officer's mounting panic. "You have just made a very, very serious mistake." She paused for a single, devastating beat, letting the full weight of her words sink in, letting them drown in the terrifying implications. "You illegally detained, insulted, and attempted to extort the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The final 6 words, "Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," did not ring out like thunder. They landed with the dead, heavy finality of a guillotine blade. Time itself seemed to freeze in that gray corridor. Rodriguez and Miller stood rooted to the spot, completely and utterly paralyzed. Their mouths hung open in disbelief and horror. Their eyes were wide, staring at Dr. Sharma as if she had just sprouted wings and a halo. All the color drained from their faces, leaving only the sickening, chalky whiteness of absolute terror. They looked at the woman before them, the expensive suit that wasn't a costume but a uniform of power, the terrifying calm that wasn't weakness but absolute control, and now this unbelievable, yet suddenly unquestionable statement. FBI Director, this woman, the woman they had profiled, harassed, insulted, cuffed, and tried to shake down for $1,000, was Dr. Anya Sharma, the head of the most powerful federal law enforcement agency in the United States. No, it was impossible. A joke, a bluff, a desperate, crazy lie. But the authority in her voice on that call, the names she used, and most of all, her extraordinary, inhuman composure from the very beginning. It all snapped into place with horrifying clarity. Couldn't be fake. It was the only explanation that made any sense. Rico Rodriguez's entire body began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. "And no," he stammered, his voice a choked, pathetic whisper. "No, you're joking. You have to be joking. Please, ma'am, please tell me you're joking." He looked like he wanted to lunge forward and tear the handcuffs off her himself, but his feet were welded to the floor by the sheer force of his terror. Kevin Miller stood like a statue carved from salt, his face ashen, his body shaking. He stared at Dr. Sharma, then at Rodriguez, his mind a vast, white void of horror. He had just participated in something monstrous. He had aided and abetted his partner in handcuffing and attempting to blackmail the director of the FBI. The consequences of that action were not just career-ending. They were life-ending. The fatal mistake was not just made. It had been revealed. And the fate of these 2 young, foolish men had been sealed the moment they decided to stop the elegant black woman who was, it turned out, the most powerful cop in the entire country. Less than 6 minutes. In the normal world, it's the time it takes to listen to 2 songs on the radio or wait for a cup of coffee. In the world of a level 1 priority call from the director of the FBI, it is an eternity of operational motion. 6 minutes after Dr. Sharma's call ended, the sterile quiet of the service corridor was shattered. It began not with sirens, but with a presence, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Then, the sound of purposeful, swift footsteps approaching. A group of 5 or 6 men and women, dressed in plainclothes business suits, jackets, sensible shoes rounded the corner. They didn't look like cops, not in the uniformed way Rodriguez and Miller did. They looked like serious professionals, lawyers, accountants, consultants, but they moved with the fluid, synchronized grace of a predator strike team. They exuded an aura of professionalism, determination, and an invisible, crushing authority that seemed to suck the very air out of the hallway. They moved as a single, cohesive unit. Their sharp, intelligent gazes swept the scene, taking in Dr. Sharma in her handcuffs, the 2 petrified officers, and the surroundings in a single, comprehensive glance. The few airport employees who happened to be in the corridor instinctively flattened themselves against the walls, parting to make way as if an unseen force field was pushing them aside. Leading the group was a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and a perfectly tailored dark suit that probably cost more than Rodriguez's car. His face was etched with concern and a barely concealed fury. This was Special Agent in Charge David Chun, the head of the FBI's entire Dallas field office. Rodriguez and Miller had seen his picture in security briefings. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine who oversaw operations against everything from international cartels to terrorist cells. The sight of him, in the flesh, striding toward them with the force of a tidal wave, was the final, brutal confirmation of their worst fears. The nightmare was real. SAC Chun walked straight to Dr. Anya Sharma, his eyes locking on the steel bracelets still encircling her wrists. A flash of pure rage crossed his face before he masked it with professional concern. "Director Sharma," he exclaimed, his voice a low, respectful rumble filled with alarm. "Are you all right? What happened here?" The other FBI agents fanned out instantly, not with guns drawn, but with a quiet, menacing competence. They formed a discreet but impenetrable perimeter around the area, effectively sealing it off. Their cold, piercing eyes fixed on Rodriguez and Miller, assessing them, judging them, and waiting for the order to act. The atmosphere became so tense it was practically a physical force. This was what real power looked like. Not the cheap, bullying power of a badge and a gun in a quiet hallway, but the deep institutional power of the federal government arriving in force. Dr. Sharma, though still in cuffs, had fully reassumed her mantle of command. She was no longer the subject of the investigation. She was directing it. She turned to SAC Chun, her voice calm and steady.
I'm fine, David.
No physical injuries, but these two officers. She nodded her head toward Vance and Carter, who were now pale and shaking like leaves in a hurricane, unable to even look up and meet the gaze of the federal agents. Are in a world of trouble. Following the director's gaze, Chan turned and leveled a look on the two policemen so full of cold fury it could have frozen fire. He didn't need to ask any more questions. The situation was horrifyingly clear. He turned to two of his largest agents, his voice now devoid of any warmth, filled only with steel-edged authority. Disarm these two officers immediately. Take their badges, their radios, and any other credentials. Secure them for processing. The two FBI agents, men who looked like they could bench press a small car, moved on Rodriguez and Miller. There was no resistance. There was no fight. The two local officers were too shocked, too terrified, and completely paralyzed by the overwhelming federal presence. Their hands went up in a gesture of pathetic surrender. The sidearms they wore with such pride, their extra cuffs, their radios that connected them to their small world of authority, all of it was stripped from them with swift, professional efficiency. The badges they had used to justify their crimes were unpinned from their chests. In the space of 30 seconds, they were transformed from police officers into detainees, from predators into prey. Another agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a respectful demeanor, approached Dr. Sharma. "Excuse me, Director," she said softly, and using a special universal key, she carefully unlocked the handcuffs. The soft click-clack of the cuffs opening was the sound of the end of Rodriguez and Miller's careers. Freed, Dr. Sharma gently rubbed her wrists, where faint red marks were already forming. Then, without missing a beat, she turned to SAC Chun and began issuing a series of clear, coherent instructions, the mind of the nation's top investigator operating at peak efficiency. "David, I want this entire area sealed off. Cordon it off now. No one in or out except our people and authorized airport personnel," she commanded. "Collect all security camera data from every angle that had a view of the incident, from the moment I was stopped near the exit until this moment. I want the tech division analyzing it immediately." She continued, her voice a rapid-fire succession of orders. "Seize their duty radios and any personal recording devices these two officers might be carrying. Specifically, I want you to check if they were using body cams. If they were, and they were active, that footage is paramount. Identify and get preliminary contact information for any passengers or airport staff who may have witnessed the initial stop. Your team can take their full statements later. And I want you to contact the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas. Immediately, notify them of this incident and request a federal prosecutor be dispatched to the scene. I want this handled by the book, from the very top." SAC Chun and his agents absorbed the orders, nodding and immediately moving to execute their assigned tasks with practiced speed. In the midst of this whirlwind of federal activity, Sergeant Al Malerno relation to Kevin Miller, but ironically, the shift supervisor for both Rodriguez and his young partner arrived, breathless and confused. He had been radioed about a situation involving his men and the FBI. He skidded to a halt, his face paling at the sight before him. The director of the FBI herself, directing a team of federal agents, while two of his own officers stood disarmed and detained, looking like condemned men. The sergeant began to stammer, trying to apologize to Dr. Sharma and Sasi Chun. But he was so profoundly in shock that the words wouldn't form. It was in that moment of utter chaos and irreversible consequence that Rico Rodriguez and Kevin Miller, finally and fully comprehending the abyss they had fallen into, job loss, federal criminal prosecution, prison time, began their desperate, pathetic pleas. "Director Hayes, please, please, forgive us," Rodriguez cried out, his voice cracking. The tough guy swagger was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly sound of pure terror. Tears and snot streamed down his face as he completely lost his composure. "We were idiots. We were so wrong. We didn't know. We swear to God. We didn't know it was you. Please just give us a chance to make it right. We're young, we have families, a whole future. Please don't ruin our lives." Kevin Miller, sobbing openly now, joined the chorus of desperation. "Yes, Director. Please have mercy. I was just following orders. It was a bad habit, a stupid mistake. We promise we will never, ever do anything like this again. Please, anything." Dr. Anya Sharma turned and looked at the two weeping, pleading men. Her eyes were like chips of obsidian. There was no pity in them.
No compassion. No hesitation.
Only the cold, hard clarity of justice. "You are not wrong for not recognizing who I am," she said, her voice quiet but powerful, cutting through their pleas like a surgeon's scalpel. She took a step closer to them, her presence immense. "You are wrong because you abused your position and your authority. You are wrong because you acted on racial prejudice. You are wrong for illegally handcuffing an innocent citizen. And you are a felon because you willfully and intentionally tried to extort money from the very person you swore an oath to protect." She paused, letting the words, each one a separate indictment, settle over their panicked minds. "This belated repentance cannot erase those actions. Your regret is not for what you did. It's for getting caught. Now, remain silent, cooperate with my agents, and wait for the due process you denied me." Her words were a verdict delivered before the trial had even begun. Rodriguez and Miller fell silent, their sobs catching in their throats. They knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that any further pleading was futile. The tide had not just turned. It was a tsunami that had already swept them away. The great, powerful wheels of federal justice were now in motion, and they were caught firmly, irrevocably in its tracks. The story of officers Rico Rodriguez and Kevin Miller did not end in that gray service corridor. In fact, that was just the beginning of their public and personal unraveling. Once the situation at DFW was fully under the control of the FBI, the case was immediately and decisively transferred to full federal jurisdiction. This wasn't just a courtesy because the victim was the FBI director. It was a legal necessity. The crimes they had committed, serious civil rights violations under color of law, and conspiracy to commit extortion under the Hobbs Act, were fundamentally federal offenses. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Texas took the case. Given its high profile and sensitive nature, it was assigned to Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Ramirez, a sharp, tenacious prosecutor renowned for her work in public corruption cases. USA Ramirez understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about securing a conviction. It was about sending an unequivocal message about the integrity of the entire law enforcement system. She worked in lockstep with SAC David Chen's investigative team to build a case that was not just strong, but airtight and irrefutable. Meanwhile, the Port Authority Police Department, which managed law enforcement at DFW, launched its own internal investigation, but it was largely a formality. Under the colossal weight of the scandal and the mountain of evidence provided by the FBI, the outcome was preordained. Both Rico Rodriguez and Kevin Miller were suspended without pay within hours. Their official termination papers were signed before the week was out. The badges they had so thoroughly disgraced were permanently stripped from them. Their careers were over. But losing their jobs was the least of their worries. A legal firestorm was gathering. Based on the overwhelming preliminary evidence, including the damning testimony from Director Sharma and the initial report from SAC Chun, a federal judge issued formal arrest warrants. The two now former police officers were arrested by FBI agents at deep humiliation for any ex-Gopan taken into federal custody to await their arraignment. The FBI's investigation was a masterclass in thoroughness. They left no stone unturned. The security camera footage from a dozen different angles in Terminal D was analyzed, creating a clear, time-stamped visual narrative of the entire incident, from the initial stop to the illegal cuffing. While the audio was faint, the visuals of the aggressive posturing and the non-consensual search were damning enough. But the true smoking gun, the piece of evidence that annihilated any possible defense, came from one of the defendants themselves. As Dr. Sharma had suspected, Officer Kevin Miller had been wearing a body camera. In his panic and inexperience, he had either forgotten to turn it off or simply didn't think it would capture his own misconduct. The audio and video recording from that body cam was a prosecutor's dream. It captured every racist and demeaning word from Rodriguez. Most importantly, it recorded in crystal clear audio the entire extortion pitch. The demand for $1,000 cash. It was the nail in their coffin. Faced with incontrovertible evidence and the prospect of decades in federal prison, Kevin Miller made the only rational choice he had left. On the advice of his attorney, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. He pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for providing a full, detailed confession of the entire event, highlighting Rico Rodriguez's role as the architect of the scheme. The trial of former officers Ryan Vance and Ben Carter took place a few months later in the Earl Cabell Federal Building in downtown Dallas. The courtroom was packed. The case had become a national story, touching on the raw nerves of race, police misconduct, and abuse of power. AUSA Ramirez presented her case with methodical precision. The security videos were shown. Then she played the body cam footage. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as they heard Rico Rodriguez's voice, full of arrogant prejudice, lay out his criminal demand. It was breathtakingly brazen. The star witness, of course, was Director Anya Sharma. She took the stand, not in her capacity as FBI director, but as a citizen, a victim. She recounted the events calmly, objectively, and with meticulous detail. She presented the facts without emotion or hyperbole, and her credibility was absolute. The defense attorneys barely laid a glove on her during cross-examination. The jury's deliberation was short. After just 4 hours, they returned. The foreman stood and read the verdict. For Rico Rodriguez, guilty of violating civil rights under color of law and guilty of conspiracy to commit extortion. For Kevin Miller, despite his cooperation, the jury followed the law based on the evidence of his active participation. Guilty on both counts as well. At the sentencing hearing a few weeks later, the judge looked down at the two men, their faces pale, their cheap suits a stark contrast to the power suit their victim had worn. "You were entrusted with a sacred duty," the judge said, her voice stern and resonant. "A duty to protect and serve. Instead, you chose to abuse your power, to act on prejudice, and to attempt to enrich yourselves by preying on a fellow citizen. Your actions are a disgrace to the badge you once wore, and a stain on the thousands of honorable officers who do their job with integrity every day." She looked directly at Rodriguez. "Your actions were not a mistake. They were a calculated series of criminal choices, born of arrogance and bigotry. They demand a severe punishment." Then she looked at Miller. "And your actions, while perhaps born of weakness and a desire to follow, were complicity nonetheless. You had a duty to intervene. You failed." The sentence was handed down. For his role as the ringleader, Rico Rodriguez was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. For his cooperation but active complicity, Kevin Miller was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. A harsh but just end to their sordid story. Back in her sprawling office at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., Director Anya Sharma looked out the window at the Washington Monument piercing the sky. She felt no joy at the news of the sentencing. There was no sense of personal victory or revenge. There was only a quiet, solemn relief that the system, for all its flaws, had worked. That justice, in this case, had been served. The incident at DFW was a painful, personal reminder of the persistent challenges America faces, the insidious nature of systemic racism, the corrupting temptation of power. She knew the fight to build a law enforcement community that was truly fair, just, and respectful of the rights of every single citizen, regardless of their race or station in life, was a long and arduous one. But she was not deterred. The experience had only hardened her resolve. It had reinforced her commitment to lead with integrity, to demand accountability, and to never stop fighting for the core principle that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. She took a deep breath, turned from the window, and went back to her desk. There were files to read, briefings to attend, a nation to protect. The real satisfaction came not from the punishment of two bad men, but from the belief that human dignity and legitimate authority had, in the end, prevailed. And that was what mattered most. So what's the real takeaway from this? It's not just a satisfying story about bad cops getting what they deserved. It's a lesson in the nature of true power versus the illusion of it. Rodriguez and Miller thought they held all the cards. They had badges, guns, and the perceived authority to ruin someone's day, or even their life, based on nothing more than their own sour prejudices. But their power was brittle like a pane of cheap glass. It was loud, aggressive, and shattered the moment it met something solid. Dr. Sharma's power was the complete opposite. It was quiet, internal, and forged from discipline, integrity, and immense competence. It wasn't in her title, which she never mentioned until the very end. It was in her unshakable calm, her analytical mind, and her absolute faith in the system she represented. This story is a stark reminder, especially here in Texas where we value strength and character, that true authority isn't about the uniform you wear or the force you can exert. It's about the person you are when no one knows your title. It's the quiet strength that can bring an empire of arrogance crashing down with a single, calm phone call. This incredible story really makes you think about the hidden depths of the people we interact with every day and the snap judgments we all make. If you were in Dr. Sharma's position, possessing that level of authority but choosing to remain anonymous, would you have revealed yourself sooner? Or would you have let the situation play out exactly as she did to ensure justice was fully served? What does this story say about the courage it takes to confront an abuse of power, even when you hold the ultimate trump card? We'd love to read your perspective on this complex moral situation in the comments below. Your thoughts make this community what it is. And if this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful content that explores the deeper side of justice.